Okay, morning everyone. I'm Rebecca Modrak. I'm a professor in the Stamp School of Art and Design and chair of SACUA. And today, unfortunately, Amna Khalid, one of our panelists, was unable to attend. But we are excited about the group that we have on stage and this event. So today's event was initiated by the Davis Markert Nickerson Committee, named for three University of Michigan faculty, Chandler Davis, Clement Markert, and Mark Nickerson, who were all suspended from the university or fired for declining to answer UX questions about their political affiliations. Markert, an assistant professor of biology, was eventually reinstated and gained tenure. Davis, a mathematics instructor, and Nickerson, a tenured associate professor of pharmacology, were both terminally dismissed by then-President Harlan Hatcher and the Regents. And this year, I've sort of given this backstory about 4 different times, and each time I've been reading some of the history of these events, and each time I've tried to introduce some of these different histories. It's really fascinating, both what happened in the early 1950s and then what happened afterwards. And so today I want to mention some of the things that occurred later on because of the firing of these faculty. So for those of us who are now observing university presidents' public complicity and private despair with the authoritarian government's assaults on higher education, it's worth noting that while Davis, Markert, and Nickerson were under siege, Hatcher confided in private that UAC's many abuses are revolting to us. This is as he was firing them. 4 years after their firing, in 1958, the National AAUP censured the University of Michigan for procedural improprieties in handling the cases. This was lifted a year later when the Regents passed Bylaw 5.09, which established a procedure that must be used before a tenured faculty member can be fired. And that bylaw is one of the strongest processes protecting faculty still today at the University of Michigan. In the fall of 1988, Adam Kulikow, a senior English major enrolled in a documentary film seminar, read in the Michigan Daily that members of the university community were asking that former President Hatcher's name be removed from the graduate library because of his role in firing Davis, Markert, and Nickerson. Kulikow interviewed faculty knowledgeable about the McCarthy era, interviewed the 3 faculty who were suspended and fired, and interviewed Harlan Hatcher, traveling to Montreal and North Carolina. When the film was complete, the English department and the local AAUP arranged for a public showing of the film on the evening of April 19, 1989. And I mention this film because after the showing of the Kulikow documentary, the AAUP chapter president requested that the university president make a significant gesture of reconciliation to the 3 professors. And when that was refused, the next AAUP president asked SACUA to right the wrong, which they did in forming this series this year. And I'm also happy to share that 26 years later, almost to the day of the original screening of Kulikow's documentary, the film will be screened again on campus on April 9th from 5 to 7 p.m. And I hope you can join us for that. We are here today because the University of Michigan allowed the government to infringe on the First Amendment rights of faculty because a few faculty were determined to follow their own thinking and to protect their political liberties, and because the faculty attempting to reconcile the past may have anticipated that it would be repeated. Thank you to the current DMN committee for selecting today's topic and speakers. A special thank you to the committee co-chairs, Michael Atzman and Nick Tobier. Thank you to Luke McCarthy and the Faculty Senate office staff for the work to make this event possible. And thank you to NCID, the National Center for Institutional Diversity, for partnering with us on this event. Now I'm happy to introduce our panelists. Our moderator, Kentaro Toyama, is the W.K. Kellogg Professor of Community Information at the University of Michigan School of Information and a Fellow of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT. He conducts research on digital technology and its social impact, and is the author of Geek Heresy, Rescuing Social Change from the Cult of Technology. For over a decade, he has been active in faculty governance at the University of Michigan. He has served in various roles on the Senate Assembly, on several of its committees, and on SACUA, the executive body of faculty governance. In 2021, he helped revive a dormant chapter of the American Association of University Professors, AAUP, in Ann Arbor, and served as its president. Jason Stanley is the Jacob Uralski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University and also serves as a distinguished professor at the Kiev School of Economics, where he donates his salary to the Comeback Alive Foundation. Before joining Yale in 2013, he was a distinguished professor at Rutgers University and has also held positions at the University of Michigan and Cornell University. He earned his PhD in 1995 from the Department of Linguistics and Philosophy at MIT and received his BA from the State University of New York at Stony Brook in 1990. Jason Stanley is the author of 7 books, including Knowledge and Practical Interests, How Propaganda Works, and my favorite, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Isaac Kamola is an associate professor at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, where his teaching and research focus on the political economy of higher education, African anti-colonial theory, and critical globalization studies. His latest book, co-authored with Ralph Wilson and entitled Free Speech and Coke Money, Manufacturing a Campus Culture War, explores the influence of dark money on the campus free speech crisis. His previous work, Making the World Global, U.S. Universities and the Production of the Global Imaginary, investigates how universities and other institutions shape global academic knowledge production. He has co-edited The Politics of African Anti-Colonial Archive and The Transnational Politics of Higher Education. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you also for your incredible leadership of the Faculty Senate this year. I don't really want to get in the way of our panelists, but I'll just mention that the way we'll do this for the next 80 minutes or so is we'll have each of our panelists speak for about 10 minutes. Then we'll have a discussion on stage, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. And with that, we'll start with Jason.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of do a close reading of the Dear Colleagues letter of February 14th. Since I'm a philosopher, we do close readings. February 14th, 2025, the United States Department of Education issued a Dear Colleagues letter about Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, so providing notice about the conditions for further federal funding. So this is the second paragraph. I'm not going to, usually I'll have my students read this paragraph, but I'm not going to do that with you. In recent years, American educational institutions have discriminated against students on the basis of race, including white and Asian students. So in other words, this is going to be the refocusing of the Office of Civil Rights, the United States Department of Education Civil Rights, to focus Title VI, which forbids discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in federally assisted programs or activities. This is announcing that there's going to be a shift to supposed anti-white and anti-Asian discrimination. So, okay, next paragraph, please. The third paragraph. So educational institutions have toxically indoctrinated students with a false premise that the United States is built upon, quote, systemic and structural racism, unquote, and advance discriminatory policies and practices. Proponents of these discriminatory practices have attempted to further justify them, particularly during the last 4 years under the banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion, smuggling racial stereotypes and explicit race consciousness into everyday training programming and discipline. Now, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this is the United States is built on systematic and structural racism in a way that is totally uncontroversial. I mean, the United States is built upon, one of our founding principles, reasons for separating from England is they weren't allowing us to conquer more indigenous land. So that's, Greg Grandin points that out in The Nation about the objection to the 1619 Project. Well, it's completely obvious that indigenous genocide and appropriation is part of the founding of the United States. And our wealth, of course, as much literature shows, slavery, the cotton industry were central to the building of U.S. wealth. So what do you do when you ban true things? It's bad to ban false things too, but it gets really wonky when you ban true things. Now, the most straightforward way to read this letter and the subsequently published guidelines, which were published on February 28th, is as defining school on student harassment, which is inconsistent with Title VI funding, inconsistent with federal funding under Title VI, to include Black history and indigenous history. That's school on student harassment. So if you teach that the United States' wealth is based on slavery, it had a foundation in slavery, or you teach the Declaration of Independence, for instance, then you are doing the same as a white professor who not just once, but continuously calls all their black students by the worst imaginable racial slur. Okay. All of this is so extreme, it's kind of hard to fathom, but if you do a close reading, you'll see it's very extreme. The guidelines for what would count as a Title VI violation are vague. From the guidelines, which were issued in February 28th, here's a quote about what's probative, the things that will be probative in the Office of Civil Rights analysis of whether or not an institution has violated Title VI. The racially oriented vision of social justice or similar goals will be probative in OCR's analysis of the facts and circumstances of it. So if the university has a racially oriented vision of social, it's kind of funny. Fascism is always, you got to have a sense of humor. If it's not funny, what is? The more extreme practices at a university that could create a hostile environment under Title VI include, quote, pressuring students to participate in protests or take positions on racially charged issues. But reason, rationality, and morality are sources of pressure. I teach in my class on propaganda and ideology, I teach scientific racism. And I argue that I teach, here are the bad arguments that scientific racism gives. Suppose you have students, and I've had students, who refuse to accept that these are bad arguments in response to counter arguments. We're just like, no. For instance, maybe two black twins, one of whom was raised by a white family, the one who's raised by a white family has experienced racism. Because there are these studies that show that two siblings, one of who's been adopted in the white family, one of who's adopted in the black, one of whom stays in their black family, the white student, the one adopted into the white family still has these effects of racism. See, how could it be? That is presumably not a very good argument. That racial disparities are not due to racism. So what do you do? You know, if you teach scientific racism, you teach arguments against it. That's just about intelligence. So the guidelines create a culture of fear and intimidation around history. If one discusses black history, one immediately risks endorsing the view that the United States is built upon systemic and structural racism. And if you're wondering about this, look at what happened to the 1619 Project. The 1619 Project is all about how great America is. It's American exceptionalism. It says America's the greatest nation in human history, and black people played a central role in that. Yeah? And Nicole Hannah-Jones even defends black soldiers in Vietnam, which, of course, Du Bois in the 1920s felt guilty about, urging black families to send their kids into World War I. So it's all American exceptionalists, yet they attacked it for attacking America, the greatness of America. The whole point is that black Americans made America great, which presupposes, a term from linguistics, that America is great. Okay. We've already seen these strategies modeled in southern states. Obviously, the state of Florida has been a model of this strategy. These policies have created unprecedented levels of widespread fear among Florida's professors and teachers. I encourage you to look at the AAUP special report on Florida's higher education institutions that says that it's a level of fear that has never before, that is like hard to even communicate. You can't, in any communication, say anything negative about DeSantis. So the state of Tennessee is an online divisive concepts reporting tracker form for students who wish to report professors whose teaching can be seen as, quote, promoting division between or resentment of a race, sex, religion, creed, nonviolent political affiliation, social class, or class of people. Imagine if your teaching creates resentment, creates division between you and someone who disagrees with you on, for instance, the mind-body problem. The Dear Colleagues letter and its attendant guidelines are easily read as banning teaching that many Americans have racist attitudes. Because if you teach that many Americans have racist attitudes, you're teaching not just that there's structural racism, but that people actually have racist attitudes. But we know from social science that many white Americans do. One study shows 51%. Basic studies agree that around half of white Americans agree that with the statement, black Americans are lazier than white Americans, or black Americans are less competent than white Americans. And to understand US politics, you need to understand this fact. I wouldn't go as far as to say every election is about race. Some elections are about the existence of transgender women, but as well. but a lot of, to understand US politics, you've got to understand this strategy that underlay the Southern strategy, the Republican Southern strategy that was then taken up by the Democrats under Clinton. You call programs you don't like welfare, and then you've already made the word welfare negative by attaching it to negative racial stereotypes. It means this program helps black people. And then you make the program less popular. If you call a program welfare, among the 50% of white Americans who harbor racist attitudes, it makes the program like 30% more unpopular than with people who don't harbor those attitudes. If you ask Americans, should the government do more to help struggling single mothers, like 70% of Americans say yes. If you ask people, should government support welfare programs, even though it's completely unclear what a welfare program is, other than it's a program to help struggling poor people, most Americans say they won't accept it. And this is what's going on with the attack on DEI. DEI is a dog whistle, like welfare is a dog whistle. You call a program, you call something DEI, and Christopher Rufo has been very clear about this. Christopher Rufo says, we're going to call anything we don't like critical race theory. And then we're going to buttress the we don't like it by showing ridiculous examples of something. And then we're going to call the whole federal bureaucracy critical race theory. And then people will be against the federal bureaucracy. It's the Republican Southern strategy connected to the propaganda that led to the end of Reconstruction, that black politicians are supposedly incompetent. But you can't teach about dog whistles. My language and power class looks like it'll be illegal. By executive order, Trump is trying to dismantle the Department of Education and following recommendations in Project 2025, eliminating funding for Title I schools. I had to put this paragraph on because at the last talk I gave on Thursday or Wednesday, I can't remember the days anymore, a group of teachers came, it's great to hear the problems of Yale, but we're at Title I schools. I was like, oh yeah, oops, sorry. Title I provides crucial federal support for students in under-resourced schools, both in urban and rural areas, special education for disabled students, and a range of other educational programs serving the working poor. The abolition of the Department of Education would mean no oversight of drastically widening educational inequalities facing millions of students. And then importantly, they're very clever at this, making it illegal or changing like the description of reality or eliminating history so you can't tell what their policies are doing. So if you eliminate any tracking of racial differences, then how can there be structural racism? Nobody knows. And climate, they're doing the same thing with climate. And then they're trying to make it illegal, teaching about the very strategies that they're employing. On March 3rd, Linda McMahon, the new Secretary of Education under Trump, issued a statement entitled, "Our Department's Final Mission." In it, she wrote about the motivation for this final mission. After President Trump's inauguration last month, he steadily signed a slate of executive orders to keep his promises, combating critical race theory, DEI, gender ideology, discrimination in admissions, promoting school choice for every child, sponsoring kids, and restoring patriotic education and civics. He has also been focusing on eliminating waste, red tape, and harmful programs. The Department of Education's role in this new area of accountability is to restore the rightful role of state oversight in education and to end the overreach from Washington. From now on, the Department of Education's main function appears to be targeting critical race theory, DEI, under which I would include African anti-colonialism, and gender ideology. The final mission of the Department of Education also includes the imposition of patriotic education, as if the United States were some sort of knockoff North Korea. The vehicle we need to be talking about, and I can talk about because I'm the parent of 2 Holocaust survivors, and I think people can be anti-Semitic all the time, but I don't think, and I, by the way, regularly experience anti-Semitism of the sort of variety where they say, the Marxist, leftist, gay Jews are controlling the world. But I don't think that all leftists are anti-Semitic. But the way they seem to be using the term anti-Semitism is it just means leftism. But at our campus of Yale, one of the largest identity groups on campus were Jewish students. So in the protests. They were having Shabbos. I just got interviewed by NBC Connecticut, and they interviewed me not because of what I've written. They didn't even know what I've written. Journalists can be weird like that. They interviewed me because during the protests, they randomly ran into me last year and interviewed me. And they're like, oh, you said interesting things as a Jewish faculty member. And then they interviewed me this time because they're like, we didn't understand half the people we interviewed in the protests were Jewish. But the media has represented an argument between Jewish people. By the way, we argue amongst each other a lot. And even there's long been a tradition of anti-Zionist Jewish thought. I mean, as long as there's been anti-Zionism, there's been Zionism, there's been anti-Zionism. Hitler even discusses the conflict in Mein Kampf. He says, you get 2 groups of Jews together and all they argue about is whether or not they should go to Palestine. But then afterwards, they seem to act like brothers with each other. So therefore, the ones who don't want to go they're saying we should do the Jewish conspiracy from inside and within. So this is just the use of the term anti-Semitism by this government is the worst anti-Semitic, not to turn everything to a story about us. Genocide also is bad. But what's happening in Gaza is the thing we should be focusing on. But this is anti-Semitic because it's the same thing they're doing with Eric Adams, right? They're taking groups and feeding into the stereotypes of them. Eric Adams is corrupt. They're saying, look, yeah, black mayor, corrupt, and that we know that, and that's okay with us because that's what we expect. And what they're doing with American Jews is they're saying they do control the institutions. They are going to get you fired. What is that going to do? We've been sort of accepted, many of us, I mean, my kids are black Jews, so they're not white Jews, but many of us are white, and many of us have sought to enter whiteness and kind of be invisibilized into America in that way, as many other groups have done. But now we're being taken up and saying, look, and that is, to conclude with the most important point, not good for the Jews. All right,
Thank you. And thanks for that close reading of the Dear Colleague letter. I find these days I can't read the news that much, and so it's helpful to know there are people who are willing to dive deep into some of these things. Isaac.
Thanks so much to Kentaro for moderating, to Luke and Eric and all the amazing staff and folks who made this happen, to Rebecca and the acronym that I always forget, the SACUA, and to the Ornery AAUP chapter. It's really exciting to be on a campus where it sounds like there's really a tradition of faculty governance, a tradition of faculty militancy and standing up and demanding to participate and be equal partners in the governance of the institution. And it's really an honor to be speaking at the Davis, Marcus, and Nickerson event in recognition of courageous folks, but also the fact that our institutions did not right a wrong, continue to right the wrong, and it's for us as faculty and students and staff to do the hard work and the just work of righting wrongs, both of the past and in the present. So what I want to do today is talk about this discourse of the new McCarthyism, and to kind of think that like, what is it that terminology is doing and what is it not doing, and in what way is the present moment a new McCarthyism, and what way it's not, and how that analysis can help us figure out kind of a strategy moving forward. As Deborah Lowenberg-Ball reminded us yesterday, the attack on higher education is an attack on all education, on K-12 primarily. If you cower the faculty that teach the future students, then the kinds of attacks that are taking place that are targeted at higher education, make sure that those really potentially incredibly radical interventions into K-12 education don't happen. The examples being that Deborah mentioned yesterday was that there's now substantial decades of evidence that demonstrates that having black teachers in classrooms with black children and students is incredibly helpful for those students. If you do not have a college or a university that is taking the deliberate action, that's using its resources to tackle that difficult problem of how do you get more black faculty trained, how do you bring them into the university trained, make the institutions diverse and equitable and inclusive such that you can train that new generation of faculty, then what you're going to do is you're going to reproduce that power asymmetry that the research demonstrates is a huge problem and continues to be. So what is at stake in these fights over higher education? It's not about just the faculty, it's about all of education, but it's also about the very possibility of a multi-racial democracy, right? That these are the stakes of other at place, and ornery AUP chapters and colleges and universities are just an essential part in that broader fight for the vision of a multi-racial democracy. So what I want to do is, I'll talk about kind of this metaphor. In what ways is the metaphor of McCarthyism accurate, right? So I think we live in a moment in which higher education and other social institutions are coming into intense scrutiny from outside actors. I think this is the thing that most readily resonates. Like, this is the new McCarthyism, right? There's bullying of intellectuals and the public in general because of their political beliefs and because of their intellectual projects and because of who they choose to affiliate with. There's blacklists, Professor Watch and all of those, kind of Canary Mission, right? It's virulently anti-communist, the kind of blanketing everything that you disagree with politically as communist, and then using the power of the government to take that caricatured understanding of what a communist is and then to bully and to intimidate people is based on a false pretense, right? The kind of making up of terms and categories and falsely accusing people. It's taking very, very small kind of, critical race theory is a very, very important and very, very rigorous, very, very important group of scholarship, but it's not this massive conspiracy, right? It is a number of really good faculty and scholars and intellectuals doing really, really, really good work. But it's not this like huge behemoth, but so it's the same thing that McCarthyism did, right? Where they took the Communist Party, which is kind of a pretty small little group of people, and turned it into this omnipresent force, right? And it's also conducted by political ideologues, right? McCarthy was a political ideologue. So I think in that way, the new McCarthyism, the language of the new McCarthyism fits like a glove, right? But I think it's also really, really important to remember that McCarthy himself was not just a virulent anti-communist. He was also a fascist, right? And he was a Nazi sympathizer, right? It's not like he was just some guy who hated communism. He used pro-Nazi propaganda in congressional hearings, right? He made his kind of public stature by using propaganda handed to him by Nazi propagandists in order to attack the prosecution of German soldiers who had massacred American soldiers at Malmedy, right? The American soldiers had surrendered. German soldiers killed them, massacred them. Those German soldiers after the war had been prosecuted in U.S. courts. And McCarthy made his career by taking Nazi propaganda and using that propaganda to prosecute the American legal system that had come up with that. He was also solicited support from America's #1 Nazi sympathizer, Francis Yockey, and he was actively involved in the American First movement, which was an avowedly fascist and pro-Nazi organization, right? So it's not like he was just an anti-communist, he was a fascist, right? Or at least he engaged in fascist politics. I should be clear, right? Because I'm sitting next to the guy who literally wrote the book on this, so I should be clear about that, right? So the current attacks on higher education and education in general and multiracial democracy is McCarthy not only because it styles itself as anti-communist, but because, like McCarthyism, it is a practice of a fascist politics, right? And as Jason describes it, fascist political forms are those that identify enemies, right? That appeals to an in-group that's usually a majority, and then it destroys the ability to tell truth about and replacing it with power. The Dear Colleague letter being that perfect example, right? Is that you basically say, you are the enemy, right? In the words of J.D. Vance, faculty are the enemy, right? Professors are the enemy. So you take the faculty, you take professors, you are the enemy. You are opposed to the real Americans, right? The majority of white, in parentheses, Americans, and then and in doing that, require us to tell and use the power of the state to force us or intimidate us, to chill us into telling things that we know are not true, right? That is just a clear example of both the current attacks on DEI, but also what a practice of a fascist politics looks like, right? So in that way, if we think of McCarthyism as McCarthy as engaged in the practice of a fascist politics, we could see that similarity of McCarthyism and the current attack on DEI. I think there's something, this is very, very half-baked, so I'm not going to stand by it entirely, but I also think that there's a real corporate interest behind this too, right? That McCarthyism was supported by a lot of folks who were anti-New Deal activists would go on and become John Birchers. And we could see that in the presentation that I gave yesterday, a lot of the anti-DEI think tanks and activists and provocateurs and this kind of whole discourse is being cooked up within organizations that are funded by Charles Koch, whose father, Fred, was a co-founder of the John Birch Society, but also a bunch of like corporate interests that want to be able to deny things like climate change is happening, right? So there is this thing where McCarthyism is not just something that is also like this corporate project as well. This is a little half-baked. I'd have to draw some more connections, but I think it's true. Now, what are the important differences, and why should we kind of be a little bit hesitant about calling this moment a new McCarthyism? I think when we talk about a new McCarthyism, then we have a tendency to think of it as an individual, right? That McCarthy is some kind of like a fringe or a lone wolf, right? And we know that McCarthy was not a lone wolf. He was actively involved in the American right-wing movements. But the language of a new a McCarthyism can make it look like we are facing a single individual. But as we know, that the current attacks on DI, the current attacks on higher education don't come from one individual, right? They come from lots of different individuals and the institutions that platform them and the politicians that benefit from them. Always true with, under McCarthyism as well, right? But I think that what's tricky in the present moment too is that we can't point to that single individual, right? It's possible to say, McCarthy is the epicenter, right? This is the person that personifies this broader kind of movement. Within what's going on now, it seems even like we're even in a disoriented funhouse mirror, precisely because there's no that single personification of what we're up against, right? So we all know Chris Rufo is just one of the people. There's also Scott Yenor, who I mentioned in my talk yesterday, who's a raging misogynist and who spoke at the National Conservative Conference, saying that independent women are, quote, more medicated, meddlesome, and quarrelsome than women need to be. And if we want a great nation, we should be preparing young women to become mothers, not finding every reason for young women to delay motherhood, such as going to university, right? He also ran the anti-LGBT platform, Action Idaho, which he demonized the Idaho Pride Fest, causing the Patriot Front to get in their U-Haul van and drive down to intimidate the protesters, no, not the protesters, the Pride event in Utah, in Idaho. And then DeSantis appointed him to the Board of Trustees of the University of Western Florida, right? So Chris Rufo is on the Board of Trustees at New College. Scott Yenor is on the Board of Trustees at University of Western Florida. Who in this room had heard of Scott Yenor before? Okay. Russ Vought, right? He's now the returning Office of Management and Budget under Trump 1. He wrote the executive order that became the language of the divisive concept bills. And he's the architect in between administrations. He became the architect of Project 2025, laying out the platform for doing all kinds of things, including ending the Department of Education, which we are seeing now. He's been very heavily promoting anti-DEI legislation in this position. Rod Dreher, is a Catholic, who believes in that we should live in a Catholic state. He's under the patronage of Orban in Hungary, and he calls out all kinds of what he calls identity politics, and kind of riles up all of this like hatred around what he calls identity politics. Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College, who chaired the 1776 Commission and is now a major figure in terms of bridging the Christian right, creating a 1667 or a 1776 curriculum that can be taught in high schools, teaching a kind of America greatness version. Right, the list just goes on and on and on. Right, there is no McCarthy that we can point to. There's a whole bunch of, and if you'll notice a pattern, they're all kind of like white guys, right? But like these whole kinds of people, it's hard to point out who is the singular actor, right? Now, the second point too, and this point isn't mine, this is Ellen Schrecker's point. And Ellen Schrecker wrote the book on McCarthyism in higher education called No Ivory Tower. Incredible book and incredibly chilling, but she points out, she says, she said this in 2021 after the first round of anti-CRT bills, where she says the president, so this was 4 years ago, she said this. She said, the present moment is worse than McCarthyism, right? The Scare of the 1950s marginalized dissents and chilled the nation's campuses, but it did not interfere with such matters as curriculum or classroom teaching. The goal was to eliminate communism and all the individuals, organizations, and ideas associated it, but it wasn't about creating new structures of knowledge to replace them to push a certain type of agenda, right? So in a way, I'm kind of ambivalent about this language of new McCarthyism, what it makes visible and what it obscures. But I think that what is really important for us moving forward in terms of thinking about how to respond is that we cannot wait for a have you no sense of decency moment, right? There is not going to be a moment where this, which itself is this myth that is not entirely true, but at least there's kind of this sense that like one of these days the fever will break, right, and people will come back to their senses, right? I think it's really important. Like in the 1950s, there was a large percentage of the American population that supported the Nazis, right, that were fascists. And we have this narrative about how fascism was won on the battlefield during the Second World War. After the U.S. helped to defeat, it didn't solely defeat, but played a significant role in defeating fascism in Europe, there was also a fight domestically against fascists in the United States to make that political ideology untenable and to make it toxic, right? So if you express those views, right, that you would be punished, you'd be disciplined, you'd be ostracized, that you could not show your face in public, right? And that activism became the basis of the kinds of ideas and bodies of knowledge and political organization that then became DEI work, right? That idea that what it means to have a society that's inclusive, to value multiracial democracy, is to make sure that our institutions are open and accessible to all. And that includes what it means to have an institution that's open and accessible to all is for people to feel shame when they express fascist ideas, right? And so I think it's really important that that it's not about waiting for the fever to break. It's about us continuing to build our political power to organize, and organize in order to publicly condemn and chastise, and also the work of these fascist ideas or these politics that these fascist forms of politics, but then to also create the types of institutions that can push back and build a better world. That's what I got.
Thank you so much. So I think what really is helpful from both of you is just how much you're helping us understand the present moment, and not just in terms of what is happening and what we get from the media, but in terms of what's happening in the background. Both that is on the one hand very visible, but if you don't trace all these events and trace the money, you can't really. It's not very clear to us. One thing that I'm sure everybody in the audience is thinking about is, okay, so we are here, and it seems like a insurmountable, onslaught that is happening. What could we possibly do as either individual faculty or faculty as a collective to help, push against this, both at, either at the university level or even nationally? What do you think are the kinds of things that we should be doing?
You want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think that this is why I think it's really helpful to frame the present moment as a backlash. I think it's both accurate, right? But a backlash is a backlash to something, right? And I think that the work that we have been doing, that American society in general that has been doing, as well as and primarily, not primarily, but a lot of really amazing work within the academy, right? This is something that really pisses me off, right? There's this story that says, higher education became woke, right? It's like the higher education did not become woke, right? That higher education was an elitist, white, male space, for as long as there has been higher education, up through the middle of the 20th century. And because of massive political organizations and civil rights organizing, anti-war, labor unionists, right? There was a massification of higher education. There was more and more people who entered the university, and when they did, they said, this place is messed up. Let's change it, right? And they built the institutions, they created the journals, the conferences, they did the hard archival work, they wrote the books that were better than the scientific racist arguments. Like they built and they studied and they researched and built up those arguments that exist today because they're true, right? The arguments that America is based on systemic racism is not just an idea that fell from the sky, right? But it was an argument that was built and is proving to be durable precisely because that argument continues to be the best, right? And maybe in a few decades we'll be like, yeah, that analysis, there's another way of understanding it that's more accurate that we, but like that's the argument that is proving to be incredibly durable now. So in that way, going back, this is just kind of a long segue to, I think it's really important to start with the fact that the kinds of ideas, the kinds of knowledge that was being produced, the types of arguments that seem to be true and durable, right, are existentially threatening to those in power and who want to justify their obscene wealth and want to justify their obscene privilege, right? Mediocre white men who want to justify an undeserved place in society without having to do the work, right? And basically like that's deeply unsettling, right? And they want to take this political route out of it. We can't beat the arguments on their merits, so we'll take this political route, use the power of the state to enforce the ideas that we prefer, right? We prefer that climate change was not man-made, so we will use our wealth to create the science that makes those arguments, right? And so in that way, I think it's really important to start from the perspective that this is a backlash to something, and that something is the hard work that academics and K-12 educators and journalists and a bunch of people have been doing now for decades, right? So to start from that position of strength, right, that those who want to privilege and prioritize the maintenance of hierarchy, the maintenance of their obscene wealth, and the maintenance of their undeserved privilege, right, are scared about the ideas, the knowledge that's been generated over decades through peer review, assessment, and through really hard scholarship, right? And then I think that it becomes important then for us to really demonstrate to a broader public that that's the case. Like that a lot of that work has kind of stayed amongst ourselves, becomes highly stylized, becomes within the walled gates of the academy, the gated communities of academic publishing. And I think it's really incumbent upon us, if we really believe that we're facing a type of practice of politics as fascist, if we really believe that the kinds of ideas that we produce within the academy can help lead us towards a more racially just and equitable world, then it's really incumbent upon us to also do the work to explain that, right? And then that, of course, then requires organizing our unions, our advocacy chapters, our faculty governance, student groups, in order to make sure that we, the people of the institution, are not the path of least resistance, right? We want to make sure the trustees might be scared of what the Trump administration is going to do. We want them to be even more scared about what the union will do,
We only have like 7 minutes left in this portion, so I'm just going to be brief. I think each of us has different tasks to do. I think me as a Jewish faculty member, I really need to do the work that non-Jewish faculty members can't do, which is to say, plenty of us are critical about the actions of Israel. Jewish Americans have always stood up traditionally for free speech. We allowed Nazis to march in Skokie, so we can allow a whole bunch of Jewish students to have Passover on the grounds of Columbia University to protest a war. So, and attacking our community, like leftist Jewish people, as anti-Semitic is something that Jewish faculty should never accept because it places us in the crosshairs of American life. So I think each of us has different tasks, and I want to say, just, because it's just happening, and so I don't, I'm supposed to stay in America and get arrested, but, I have kids and stuff, and I don't think I will be arrested because my work has been entirely pointless and to stop this. So I think keeping me around for fun would be great and probably what they would do. But I'm probably moving to the University of Toronto, so I've got kids and stuff, and this country is but a number of reasons, Toronto versus New Haven. But
Though, if Trump has his way, you might still be back in the United States.
right. So things are bad, but and I don't think it's going to be. I think Isaac is exactly right. There's not going to be those. They're going after whole categories of people. Mm-hmm. I mean, the scientists who are like, oh well, we're not in gender studies. Like, oops, we're all in this together. When they're attacking scientists for connections to China, when they're attacking faculty for connections to anything that might divide people, then they're going to go after large categories, and they're not going to make the mistake of making individual people martyrs. Mm-hmm. I guess Khalil is a martyr now, but yeah.
So one thing I'm hearing from both of you is like we should lean into our ability to use our voice, right? As people who have a lot of expertise on certain topics, you're suggesting we should do it, individually what we happen to be able to do given our identities, given our work. Yeah. One question along those lines, and one that I think I see more discussion of is, especially for those of us who we are left-leaning. We also, there are surveys that show that university faculty do tend to be, on average, more politically left than the population on average. To what extent do you think we should, really stick to what we believe, right? Because we don't want to give an inch in this battle for minds, versus trying to find ideas or rhetoric that is more broadly appealing, possibly even to people that we currently think are, on the other side of things, as a way to, really win this kind of contest for opinion and understanding.
Okay, I'm going to go first on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Excited. I think we should just take physics, math, chemistry, chemical engineering, and tell them, you guys go hire Trump supporters.
Yeah.
Because it is nothing to do with the humanities. Yeah. The population of non-Trump supporters in academia has zero to do with gender studies. It has just as much to do with the physics department. So I think we start in physics by you guys doing affirmative action for Trump supporters, not you guys here in the information sciences, but them, go hard science by hard science. And so it's just a problem that conservatives don't go into physics research. Not conservatives, because I think the majority of academics are kind of mealy-mouthed, anti-woke white dudes, who are kind of resentful of, right? We all know that. Who are kind of resentful as the awards are not going to them lately. Yeah. So I will say I disagree with you that wokeness has not come. The Yale Philosophy Department last year hired its first black faculty member. And so their wokeness, he is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, first tenured black faculty member. It's only 2024. So all of that is like just commenting in a funny way. So I think we need to point out that we should just focus on what happens in authoritarian countries is what's happening in Florida. They do patronage appointments. Yeah. So they're not going to they're going to try to transform things into kind of banana republic-y kind of. Here's a job where you can earn $120,000 a year, and you don't have to show up or whatever. Yeah. That's what I suspect.
Yeah. I think too that there's this conflation that happens. Well, so first of all, those statistics is really important that there are more people who contributed to Democratic parties among the faculty than there are people who contributed to the Republican Party. Those are compiled by campus reform and outlets like that reduce these reports. So there's this infrastructure of people that are creating the evidence and the data.
That is literally created.
That is then circulating. And if you look at where people cite that, it may not be the first site, but if you go back, you will see that whole narrative about oh my God, this is so terrible, right? That there are more people who contributed to Democratic campaigns than Republican campaigns on the faculty, right? That whole set of arguments and data is being produced by political operatives who want to delegitimize the university.
Ray Rodriguez, the chancellor of the Florida system, told me cited the campus reform telling me.
Yeah.
So it's not like hidden.
Yeah, and these are like students get paid $50, to write outrage pieces about their university. Like that, like they're hiring students to like do this oppo research on higher education, right? So that's where that's the level at which this argument is playing out. Second of all, we know that it's not genuine. It's disingenuous, right? Because viewpoint diversity does not mean that they're going to hire a bunch of Marxists in the business school, right? It means certain things. It means we're not going to have as many black sociologists. We're going to have fewer people studying gender, right? And we're going to have more conservative ideas. Like that's just what it is. It's not a genuine argument, and it also conflates what goes on in my classroom. It assumes that because I donated to a particular political candidate or have a particular party affiliation, right, that what goes on in my classroom is the indoctrination along those, which is, you would read Adam Smith better in my class than I would imagine you would read it in the class of the right-wing funded, dude on campus, right? And that's because, we're good academics. We take our jobs seriously, and we understand that we come to our positions because we've thought really hard about them, right? And that we have a commitment in ideas, and we've done the work, and are changing. Our ideas are mutable and are evolving as and that's what the process of learning is. And then I think the fourth point is that those who are making that kind of argument should like really think hard. Like, why is it that the arguments that you hold on to so powerfully as being so unsaleable and true, and therefore neglected for purely ideological reasons, right? Why are those not making more of a headway in the university, right? Like, if there's something about those ideas that can't hack it through peer review, right? It can't, because the opposite is true, right? The feminists, the critical race scholars, right? In the 60s and 70s, they were like, oh man, look at these journals. How are we going to get these ideas, and they did the work, right? They did the hard work. Right?
I don't think you're holding our side enough to account the people. So Yale has a whole program that does nothing but ideological indoctrination against the nuclear family. Yeah. It's called Directed Studies. We teach Plato's Republic. Plato advocates removing children from their family at birth and having the state raise them. So I think Plato's Symposium normalizes pedophilic relationships between older men and young. Classical education is indoctrination into these wild, radical ideas, and we do that at Yale.
Thank you, and on that note, I'm going to open it up to the audience.
So thank you for that. If the new McCarthyism is a helpful analogy, it's not going to be an exact analogy for different times and contexts. So given those differences, why is Donald Trump not the personification of the new McCarthyism that you were looking for?
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, an analogy is helpful in terms of what it allows us to do, right? Is it a useful tool? And so I think that in a way, I think that the analogy of McCarthyism kind of gets in the way, if you will, of us really confronting kind of what we're up against, right? Because the story of McCarthyism, right, is that there is generally a decent American policy public that then kind of got lulled in by this singular ideologue. And then when that power of that ideologue was kind of torn away, then all of a sudden Americans woke up and said, oh, phew, God, we were under the Pied Piper spell, and now we can go back to being good upholders of democratic norms and liberalism and all of that, right? So I think that built into the analogy of McCarthyism is that kind of a story, which I think that what Donald Trump has showed us, in the last 3 election cycles, is that the kinds of politics that he exemplifies, the types of power bases that he emboldens, and the types of hatred that he kind of unleashes is not in a way exceptional, right? Is that in a way the work is much harder than it was and I think that in 2016, if we thought about kind of how the response to Trumpism was considered, was like, oh, we can stall these policies in Congress through all these kinds of, through the filibuster and all these different mechanisms. Then we can use the courts to stop this, right? And that if we do that, then this guy will be kind of like revealed as a fraud, right? But I think that what we've learned, in the last 12 years is that, or 10 years or whatever, is that the problem is much deeper, the rot is much deeper. And so in a way, I think the McCarthyism, the language of new McCarthyism is helpful to say, like, this is an exceptional period of time that really requires us to be committed, like the folks whom this talk is named after, right? To really stand up on our principles in the face of personal threats, right? That is important, but at the same time, we also can't believe that there is going to be this, oh, phew, okay, we're out from under the spell now, right? Yeah.
There's a hand over here.
I wanted to, sorry, thank you. The solutions that you have provided are all based on our individualistic solutions, in the sense that you tell us to keep doing what we've been doing. We do that anyhow. I mean, that's why we're in academia. I mean, we are in the process of knowledge production, and that is what we will keep doing regardless. But I think at this juncture, it's extremely important to get together as faculty, together.
Solidarity.
I mean, that we have to be a community.
Yeah.
We cannot take this thing, take on this. And I know this because I've been an activist not only here, but where I come from, which is Turkey. I mean, so as a consequence, I know how these things operate.
Yeah.
What is important in that, and I have been one of the faculty members who signed
The petition that got everybody
the petition
arrested.
not to kill Kurds, and as a consequence, I can't go back to Turkey.
Of course not.
Yeah, I mean, so what that experience has demonstrated to me is that we have to get together as faculty. So the Senate is definitely an important way to do that. But I was also wondering, in addition, what do you think about unionization of faculty?
I'm going to speak to the solidarity point first, and you can speak to the unionization point. I think we had this. I've been in the faculty senate for many years at Yale. Confused as to where I am. And there was a scientist-humanist divide, and the scientists were trying to get us to pay attention to faculty who had been targeted for their connections to China, saying that it was totally political. And we didn't really understand that on the humanities side. We didn't understand, Faculty Senate did pass a resolution protecting one of our scientists. Then the scientists, I think, didn't really understand what was going on with critical. The Faculty Senate, we did have an event on the gag orders, the educational gag orders, that was very well attended. But they were like, okay, what's going on? Are you guys Marxists? But then when the Trump regime came, they cut all the funding to the sciences because that's where the money is. Like, you wouldn't rob a bank in a gender studies program. Right. So that created solidarity, and now people know the move that some of the majority of Yale are these anti-woke white dudes who are like, this is our time. And but I think that they want to say, maybe if we get rid of gender studies, then we can get the federal funding back. But it's not going to happen that way, because COVID turned people against the sciences too, and public health. And so solidarity just is solidarity across areas, and recognizing, and this leads into the woke point, the union point, which I'm going to hand over to Isaac in a second. That's what a union is. Our workplace is under attack. Yeah. Also solidarity with administrators, because as soon as we start being like, okay, let's throw the administrators under the bus so they'll leave the faculty alone. I mean, we all have complaints to the administrators. They're throwing us under the bus because the right wants to say they should run the universities. So at the same, so we all have to have solidarity, and we have to recognize that this is all the anti-wokeness stuff, all the anti-Semitism stuff. It's all an attempt to break us apart. And,
No, I think that's really important, and I hope I wasn't interpreted as saying that doing our research is sufficient, right? I think it's important that that's the starting point. That's the thing that's threatening, and because that's threatening, we have to keep doing it, no matter what the chilling effect, no matter what the harassment, no matter what the attacks are, that we have to hold true to the recognition that what we are doing in our everyday work as academics is threatening to those who want to reproduce hierarchy, racism, patriarchy. And so in that way, that's the first step. And then I totally agree. I think that organizing as workers in higher education is really, really important. I think that the American Association of University Professors, if you become a member of the AAUP, you're a member of 6741, which is an amalgamated unit in the American Federation of Teachers. So you become a member of the AFT as well. And in that way can become really involved in labor organizing of all kinds. And both the AAUP and AFT are involved in what's called Higher Education Labor United, which is an effort to bring together labor unions from all across higher education, right? So not just faculty, but also custodial workers and dining hall workers and graduate student unions and a whole bunch of labor with the idea of building wall-to-wall power. I think that's absolutely essential, right? And to have that politics that says I can only do my scholarship and teaching because of all this infrastructure that exists here, and we're all workers, we're all in this, and therefore, the work that I do is dependent upon the work that others are doing, and to build solidarity not only among the faculty. And so what that means is that even at University of Michigan, where you may not have an organized faculty union, by being a member of the AAUP chapter, that kind of puts you into conversations with the broader labor movement and that work to organize across campuses.
Thank you for that. Let me ask people to introduce themselves if they're willing to. I should have said this earlier.
Hello, my name is Gustavo Souza Marques. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Musicology. And I'm wondering what's the impact of this new political climate over faculty of color who are immigrants. Mm-hmm. And for instance, during summer, I have to go back to Brazil to renew my visa, and I am worried about it, And yes, I would like to hear more about it because, for instance, I know that Trump supporters, they say that they don't have a problem with documented immigrants, but they have a problem only with undocumented immigrants. Yeah. And I would like to understand better that mentality, because I know they are being very racist, but at the same time they have like a double discourse of saying, okay, we are not being racist because we are accepting people who are documented here in America, So I would like to hear more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole purpose of what we're experiencing is to force us to have to ask these questions, right? In order to make us feel unsecure and to pit us against each other, right? For you to have to worry about your visa and about concerns about travel, and me not to have to worry about that. And so that then creates a difference between, what we as faculty have to navigate and different kinds of experiences. So that's what I think conceptually, that's kind of where I would start. There is, you could reach out to me personally, and I could kind of put you in contact with some folks who are thinking about these issues. There's starting to become some resources that are coming online about international students and faculty traveling guidance for traveling, what kind of legal precautions. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to provide any legal advice, but I think that this is something that is definitely on the radar of the AAUP, of the AFT, and other organizations that are trying to work through this issue kind of in real time and are working on the guidance and the legal support. And hopefully, it'll be there when it comes time. It's already there. You just kind of have to find it now, and hopefully those resources will be more readily available as they get developed and put online.
Have you noticed that this, as to apropos the first point, this, oh, phew, they're not going after me.
Yeah.
That's like everywhere now.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild. It's like the federal workers. I have a lot of friends in the federal workforce. I have a lot of, but that's first they came for, kind of relevant.
Yeah.
First they came for public health, but.
Yeah. And also, I think it's really important. There isn't going to be a rationality to it.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
It's not like, oh, I have this class of visa, and therefore I will be. And I think that what we're seeing with Mohammed Khalil is just a great example, right? A green card holder, totally, and that for whatever idiosyncratic reason, he was the individual who was targeted.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, trying to be rational people who are academics, who kind of think in terms of arguments and reason.
Well,
and all of
randomness
that.
is the whole point
Yeah.
because it creates fear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the kind of stochastic terrorism.
Exactly.
By the way, I teach hip hop and Latin American music.
Yeah.
So all the time I'm talking about critical race theory,
Yeah.
post-colonialism, feminism, and things like that. So that makes me worried as well,
I'm teaching a course on fascism and patriarchy.
Yeah.
But yeah, who knows? I spoke with a panel for the American Philosophical Association on the gag orders, and there was a professor from some southern state. This was maybe a year or two ago, and their chair had distributed a questionnaire who's teaching critical race theory, and she was teaching Kim Crenshaw, and she said, I thought for a few days, and then I wrote back, I'm not.
Yeah.
I said, how could you do that? And said, the thing they say is critical race theory is not something I'm teaching.
Yeah.
I hope you aren't teaching that white people are inherently evil.
Over here, hi, I'm Matt Benjamin. I teach in history and Afro-American and African studies. I'm a historian, so I have a short comment and then a quick question. The comment just is the importance of your comments about that McCarthyism isn't a blip in time, right? The anti-communist Red Scare, I encountered in the mid-'80s as an anti-apartheid activist. There were sectors of our movement that wouldn't touch the ANC, wouldn't touch Nelson Mandela, as hard as that is to believe, right? So, and I know you know that. So that's, I think, a crucial, important thing, that this is not something that we're going to make disappear, right? Mike, I'm going to ask you a little unfair question, which is to comment on the letter yesterday from the Trump administration to Colombia. I don't know if I'm hoping you've seen it, as well as, and it's the way at which it links targeting Middle East studies and African studies to changes in admissions.
And South Indian studies.
And South Asian
But
studies.
it's South Asian studies. It's a confused letter because there's no department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African studies. It's a program.
Well, and it's a confused, and of course they don't know what we do, so that's not
Right,
terribly surprising.
exactly. That needs to be borne in mind at all times.
But it also links all that to the repression of student protests, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just Khalil, right? We've now seen the president of the Graduate Student Union at Columbia expelled yesterday. They're retracting degrees at Columbia yesterday.
Multi-year suspensions and expulsions.
So this seems like there's an agenda in that letter that maybe goes, that we need to
Yeah,
recognize it's going bigger. And I ask, so go ahead, comment.
We know they're taking advice from Orban. Orban actually had a private meeting at the Heritage Foundation during the writing of Project 2025. Quite clearly, they're Central European University in Colombia. What Orban did is he took CEU as like a target very centrally. And that seems to me to be a good analogy and way of thinking for what they're going to do about Colombia. What that means is it doesn't fucking matter how much Colombia bends over and performs the obsequiousness we are now seeing, seeking to make it into the history books in the annals of cowardice. Because they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. They're trying to take Columbia down as much as they can and say, look, and even the politest, Ross Douthat had an interview with Chris Rufo, and I'm of two minds of Douthat's interviews, because on the one hand, they bring out how extreme and crazy, they bring out a lot of information, but they also normalize. And so it's a very normalizing interview. But Rufo says, we don't want to destroy the elite universities, we just want to shrink them, put them in their places and shrink them. So,
Yeah. And I think too, the targeting of, I did a survey in 2020 of faculty who had been written about by campus reform. We identified all the faculty members who had appeared in campus reform stories. We sent out a survey. Then
I filled out the survey.
And we, oh great, yeah. And then we, and the thing that stood out to us is we were expecting, because campus reform has trophies of people that they've gotten fired, right? They call those victories, right? And so basically, we expected that you're more likely to get a faculty member fired, right, if they're at a community college or state school or something like that. And we noticed that by and large, the most of the stories were written about people, faculty members at R1s and private, large Ivy League institutions. At that point, like my co-author at the AAUP, the former research director, who was, who had studied McCarthyism in higher education, he said, this is important, right? I was like, okay, I think it's probably just, who is, but increasingly I'm seeing that is the trend, right? Like if you can make Harvard and you can make Columbia and you can make UPenn heal, right? Then that sends the shockwave, right? And I think that what's happening now is that it's not a rational response, right? It's basically, how can we inflict as much harm in this kind of stochastic, terroristic, kind of over-the-top way that is just relentless, right? And you do that to, that you start off at least with a number of institutions that have viewed themselves and that the American society in general has viewed as kind of like untouchable, like, built on granite. Like there's no way that these institutions.
I should say this is the theory. And there are different theories of why they're going after these elite universities when the vast majority, like Heterodox Academy was pulling this shit back in the day when they were like, all this stuff is happening, and everything they were talking about was like Yale, Princeton, and Harvard, when the when like students at Missouri were facing like nooses hung on their doorknobs. I got Storm Irvin, one of the founders of the organizers of the Missouri student protests in 2016, to speak at Yale. And she was saying, they call the N-word a terrible racial slur all the time. That's just a matter of course. And I tried to get her to talk about that, and she said, no, that's just ordinary. I'm not going to talk about that. But they're focusing on these elite universities. There's a number of theories of why the graduates of these universities are targeting the universities they graduated from. Ron DeSantis is Yale and Harvard. Tom Cotton is Harvard and Harvard. Hawley is Stanford and Yale. Ted Cruz is exactly my age. This is one of my SUNY Stony Brook professors. I went to SUNY Stony Brook. I'm a man of the people. Ted Cruz went to Princeton. He's exactly my age. These are all Ivy League schmucks. And why they are targeting the Ivy League? Could be, that is a good theory.
Hi, everyone. I was trying to be incognito, but I think I need to out myself. So I need to let you all know you do have an administrator among you. My name is Rosie Sabaggio. I am the Dean of LSA. I'm also a professor of psychology and of women's and gender studies. And I just want to say a couple of things quickly. Professor Stanley, I want you to know that I watched a YouTube of you speaking, and I found it inspiring. And it really helped me with some of my comments that I've been making and had to make. So I just want you to know that your voice and your speech is helpful to administrators.
That is amazing.
And with that, I just also really feel compelled to say, I'm who I am because of this university. I was a graduate student here. I became a professor here. My mentors were here. They've made me who I am as a scholar, as a teacher, as an administrator. I'm here because I will never throw the faculty under the bus. I have no desire to throw the faculty under the bus. So I'm here because I believe in the LSA faculty, I believe in the University of Michigan faculty, and I'm here because in this time, I believe that this institution is capable of fighting the challenges before us. But we've got to do that, as you said, together.
Yeah.
And I hope that we also think about administrators as human beings who are also under tremendous amounts of pressure. And lately I've been thinking about, as a clinical psychologist, I know, for example, that the way that we got homosexuality not to be a diagnosable disease in DSM was not simply by the activists and the protests on the streets.
Yes.
It was also by having psychiatrists in the APA who could change the actual DSM manual. So it takes all of us working with different strategies in different places at different levels. And I hope that it's okay that you have an administrator here among you. But I just felt it really important. I think if we start construing things as us against them, even within administration and faculty, it will be harder to accomplish what we want to accomplish. Because I will tell you, I am an administrator today only because of the values and commitments that I have. And when I can't work for those, I will no longer be in this role.
Solidarity, thank you for those. The solidarity between administrators and faculty, although you're both, is really essential right now. We're seeing at Yale attempts, as I said, to use this to drive wedges between the administration and the faculty, and we can't have those wedges.
Thank you. I just want to say, by the way, that if there are other administrators, we are there. Everybody's welcome. This is an open event. Certainly wasn't intended to be only for a particular group.
Hi, thank you for all that you have to say. My name is Emily. I'm an assistant professor of pediatrics in the medical school. I was wondering what type of language you can use when you're having these conversations with people who might disagree with you, and what has led to a successful outcome in those conversations?
Yeah. I think in general, the kind of growing rule of thumb in conversations that I've been having about this is like a really important question, right? Especially because the political operatives on the right who are engaged in this fascist practice of politics have basically taken a handful of universities like Harvard and Columbia and said, this is what higher education is, right? So those of you who don't have college education or don't have access or had a bad experience with college, like this is what you're being excluded from. This is the enemy. This is what universities are. And then, but it's actually, there's a lot of evidence that demonstrates that people may be critical of higher education as a sector, right? Especially when it's caricatured as this kind of distant, faraway thing. But if you ask them about the institution that's just down the road, then there's oftentimes, much more, experience with the institution, much more appreciation, much more understanding of what that institution is, right? And so I think that it's really incumbent that we, are able to communicate about particular institutions and particular communities with particular people that go through them. And I think that there's, as a scholar of higher education, there's a tendency for us to talk about the university. And when you look at what we mean when we say the university is like this, what we mean oftentimes is we slip into assuming that is like the R1 and the Ivy League, the big kind of institutions, when in fact we know that that's where a minority of students go through a Harvard or a small liberal arts school like where I teach, right? The vast majority of students are going through regional state schools and community colleges And so in that way, I think it's really important for us to, part of building solidarity, a different kind of solidarity, is to recognize that, that while certain faculty at certain institutions or certain people are placed to have the time and the resources to write the books and to the journal articles and to be out there, that we should always remember that the community of higher education is much, much, much broader than that. And we're defending, what we want to defend is not just our particular institution, right, but the whole project. And we want to make sure, I think it's more important, right? I mean, at the same time that we're defending our own institutions from these right-wing takeovers, right, we also need to be advocating for universal college for all, right? If everybody in America who wanted the opportunity to go to college and to get an affordable, high-quality education, if everybody was allowed to do it, then the vast majority of Americans would know that that caricature of what gets taught in the classroom, that idea of indoctrination, is not actually what takes place, right? But because you have that distance, then that kind of misinformation is allowed to percolate because people don't have that experience. So really being able to communicate and prioritize and think about and lift up the kinds of education that takes place all around the country.
I mean, one thing some of these discussions are old, right? The Booker T. Washington Du Bois debate, vocational education versus a liberal education. So somehow we need to communicate that, revisit those debates, that liberal education is foundational for democracy. And fortunately, we have Du Bois's work. We have work that speaks to that. There's a lot of complexities there. Lived experience, of course, I mean, they want to attack putting, so we can defend things like standpoint epistemology. I think standpoint epistemology is inconsistent with the Dear Colleagues letter. Can't you have disabled people helping you formulate policy for disabled people at a university? I think it's illegal, as a number of people have mentioned, to look at race in medical school admissions, say, or for training teachers, even though we know that different communities, I mean, women like to have women doctors, and different communities, black doctors will work in different communities than white doctors to some extent. So explaining those things that are important, aspects of diversity that everyone should accept. Oh, you're a conservative woman. Would you want a female doctor? Things like this. I think that helps. Going back to those original debates might help. And then something I've done for years, and I'm doing now lately with the protests, is explaining the misperceptions. Explaining the misperceptions is hard, especially the misperceptions about the protests, because it involves long-standing arguments between groups of Jews that Americans have no conception of. And so unspooling those is tricky. But explaining the misperceptions, that's something I would do. I used to debate. Heterox Academy used to bring me in as their resident dissenter because they needed one. And so, I would just do debunking after debunking, which is, I don't know how useful that is.
All right, we're a little bit past time, but maybe one last comment to leave us with.
Isaac?
I think that the question is that we all have to ask, are we going to rise to the moment, right? And I think that it's really important that we think about that we do what we can in the capacities that we have, and recognize that we can't do all of the fight all of the time, right? And that we have to pick our battles, and we have to be strategic. We might also have other priorities, family and loved ones and our own health and things like that we have to take care of. But it's a long fight, right? That is not something that it's a long fight, and we all need to be in it, and we all need to be in it together. So do the kinds of things that we can do to make sure that we're in that long fight. And when you are doing that work together and in solidarity, it makes it possible to do it with joy and to do it in a way that's sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, hit hard back. Don't be relieved that you're not a member of the targeted group. I can't really speak like some heroic person because I'm fleeing to Canada. But even though I have a position of privilege from which I should fight, et cetera, but I also have kids. So, you know, I think we've covered the points of resistance, and the University of Michigan is going to be a target because of its long-standing central role in American politics. I taught here. I loved it here. Bollinger was president when I was here, and you know, it was a state university, a state-located university that you know, represents the values of liberal education, and we just need to defend those values in the face of what's going to be authoritarianism for possibly decades to come.
All right, well, thank you so much, Isaac Kamola and Jason Stanley. Thank you for coming to Ann Arbor.